da Unifesp. Hoje nós temos o prazer de receber uma convidada canadense, mas que está nos Estados Unidos. Em respeito à nossa convidada, o idioma desse webinário será inglês. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure to receive our guest, which is the Judy Cornish. And Judy is going to talk and to let us know, to understand a little bit more about knowing the Down method for dementia care in Brazil. But I would like to say thank you on behalf of the Graduate Studies and Research Office of Unifesp, also to Professor Emanuela. Professor Emanuela, she was working hard behind the scenes to guarantee that this webinar will happen, and it's happening now. I'd like to thank all the attendants that were waiting for this webinar, and it's our sincere thank you, Professor Emanuela and Professor Judy. Professor Emanuela, she's an occupational therapist. She obtained a PhD from Psychology Institute of the São Paulo University, and she's a professor of the Unifesp, Baixada Santista, and she's the coordinator of Asian Observatory at Unifesp, and she also part of the CAP Sprint program of Unifesp on the thematic of longevity, which is longevidade here. So thank you so much for sharing your time and give us this pleasure of having you this afternoon to learn. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you so much, Professor Emanuela, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. This is, of course, a topic very dear to my heart. So
just a minute, Judy, just a minute. Thank you, Camilo. I will introduce you, okay, Judy? Okay?
Okay, yeah.
Judy Cornish is the author and founder of Dementia and Alzheimer Wellbeing Network, DOM Methods, creator of this method of care for dementia. She is a lawyer specializing in the rights of the elderly. He has 2 published books. One is Handbook of Dementia and Dementia with Dignity, which are centered on caring for people with dementia from theory to practice. Now I can invite all of us to listen and learn about these methods and her practice. Yes, thank you, Judy, for being with us now. And after your presentation, I will see the questions on the chat, and after the question, I will talk with you about these questions. Okay?
Super. That's a great idea. Thanks very much, Emanuela. So, are we ready? Should I begin?
Ok, eu vou falar para as pessoas que estão acompanhando a gente que a gente vai ter mais ou menos 1 hora de apresentação. We will have 1 hour to present to your presentation. And depois da fala dela, a gente vai ter 30 minutos para perguntas. E aí as pessoas podem escrever as perguntas no chat, que a gente vai fazer as perguntas para ela, ok? Você pode me ajudar, Danilo?
Of course, Judy. So it's 1 hour for your presentation, and then during the presentation, people will ask questions on the chat. We're going to have them for after the presentation, so we'll have 30 minutes for questions.
Sounds good.
The floor is yours then.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. Talking about the Dawn method is something I've been doing now for about a decade. And so I'm very happy to be able to talk about it and answer questions as well. So whenever I begin speaking, we have to begin by actually defining dementia. Here in the United States, in North America, Canada included, there's quite a bit of confusion about whether dementia is a disease, and it's quite often used synonymous with Alzheimer's disease. But of course, we know that dementia itself is a syndrome or a condition. It's a group of symptoms, and that disease, various diseases, will cause dementia or can result in dementia. But also it can be events in life. So it could be completely unrelated with disease and be caused by a traumatic brain injury or by a bad reaction to an anesthetic. And lately we've been hearing more about how lifestyle choices can bring a person to be more likely to develop dementia later in life. That would include a sedentary lifestyle during the middle adult years, certain drugs, and also eating a diet that is very high in processed foods. And so we know that dementia itself isn't a disease. It's actually it's ongoing deterioration of certain cognitive skills. And the key word there is ongoing. This deterioration continues at an undefined rate. We really can never expect how quickly a person might be losing their cognitive skills, these skills that are lost to dementia. All we know is that they will continue to lose them. And so, well, as this occurs, because these are cognitive skills, of course, it will affect very much about the person. It affects their ability to communicate, but it also affects their ability to perform the tasks of self-care. Even something as simple as brushing your teeth or making a pot of tea will become difficult. And so as people lose these cognitive skills, we see their behavior change, and we see their ability to interpret what's happening around them begin to change. And so because of these sweeping changes that occur for the individual, there is a great deal of fear and misunderstanding, lack of knowledge. And as a result, we have a tremendous stigma against dementia. This stigma is not specific to one culture or another. When I talk with caregivers and professionals in India, I know that the stigma there is so strong that if a family member begins to experience dementia, very often the family will simply secret the person away and not even let neighbors or even more extended family members interact with the person ever again. And this comes from this fear of the way the person reacts and the way the person behaves as they're losing these skills. This, of course, results in a great deal of difficulty for the family and certainly difficulty for the person. There's a tremendous amount of stress as the family begins to try to pick up and provide more care for this person, this elder usually, who is becoming less and less able to make good decisions on their own. Very often we have both families work, or both spouses in a family working, because they need to have two incomes to support and raise the children. And here in the United States, it's estimated that 70% of the expense of caring for someone who's experiencing dementia falls on the family, even though we have programs here, Medicare and Medicaid, that provide a great deal of support in that area. But families, both in expense, the amount of money it costs to provide care, to oversee, to stay home and be the caregiver, and also emotional expense, the expense of constantly trying to help somebody who no longer can perceive risk, helping that person stay safe and trying to prevent that person from causing the family greater expense and cost. So the stigma that we experience or that we know is related to dementia is a very costly one, but it's associated with our lack of understanding. And so I think whenever we talk about how can we improve the lives of the people who are experiencing dementia, it's the flip side of the coin. It's tied completely to how can we improve the lives of families who are caring for people who are experiencing dementia. And the only way we can do that is by increasing our understanding of what it means to be experiencing dementia. At present, we don't have a very clear understanding. And I think that is the result of the model that we use, the model that we apply to dementia in our attempts to live with it and to work with it. So for us to truly address and lessen the fear that we respond to dementia with, whether it be ourselves when we begin to find ourselves becoming more forgetful, or whether it's the family who are watching a loved one become less and less able, more forgetful, less able to make good decisions. We react with fear because we don't understand what's happening. And that is due to the model that we apply. The model we've been using simply doesn't work. And so that's where I began. This is why an attorney, a lawyer, is talking to you about dementia care. I came into the world of dementia care and I learned about dementia from people who are experiencing it. And from my law background and my undergraduate work, to me, the only logical place to approach the problems presented by dementia was to think about how it affects the person's experience. And out of that came my strength-based approach, which is the Dawn method. So now let me introduce Dawn and tell you a little bit about how it came to be. Dawn is an acronym for Dementia and Alzheimer's Wellbeing Network. And I chose that name very carefully because I wanted to have a name that implied hope. Hope rather than loss. Hope rather than inexplicable problems and behaviors, unsolvable problems. And there really is hope, is what I discovered. Now, this began when I, as an attorney, left the larger city, Portland, Oregon, where I was practicing law, and thought I was going to semi-retire to a small town in the mountains of Idaho back in 2010. Very quickly, though, as I began to settle into this new town and get to know my neighbors, I met the woman across the street. She was in her probably middle to late 60s at that time. And I would chat with her as she was watering her tomato plants in the front yard. Her daughter came over one night and said, "Mom is getting really forgetful. We can't let her live in her home anymore. We will have to put her into a care facility." And a care facility here in the United States is a very large group living project that's owned by a corporation and run by employees. And there would be several hundred people living there. And care is not typically very good. And so when I heard that, I volunteered to help. I said, well, I'm right here. I could be like her daughter. I know you live far away. Let me take her to the grocery store. Let me help her run her errands. Let me just check in and make sure she's okay. And very quickly, I was working with a large number of people. I got phone calls from other daughters and sons who were living far from Moscow, Idaho, asking me to check in on their parents who were becoming forgetful and still living there. And very quickly, I ended up with employees, because my goal was to help my elders, these people, my neighbors, who became my friends, and over the years, many. And out of that, providing care, just being with people who were experiencing dementia, but still living in their normal homes with their usual routines, without being uprooted and given new problems and new issues to try to deal with. That's where the books have come from, and my training programs and my consulting and teaching. But back then, in 2010, I was still a lawyer. And as I left my law practice and began working with people who were living at home with dementia, my greatest concern was that because I wasn't a medical professional, because I had never studied social work or nursing or become a doctor or psychology, that I would inadvertently harm somebody or let somebody come to harm. But very quickly, as I spent time over the months, I think at first it was about 6 people in the first few months, 6 elders living alone in their own homes, their children living far away, and they were gradually becoming more and more forgetful. But very, very soon I began to notice that what I'd heard about dementia was that people became crazy. And yet what I was seeing was not people losing their senses. I was seeing people who were struggling to continue to live their normal lives, but they were losing very specific skills, some thinking skills and memory skills, of course, but also some attention skills. I could see that they weren't able to make good decisions because they were having trouble making sense of facts, comparing facts one to another, or seeing why something was more important than one thing was more important than another thing, or keeping their attention focused on a task long enough to go through the steps. And so as this became more clear to me, I came to have less concern that I might harm somebody inadvertently, and more concern that many people were being given far less care and treated with less kindness than they should be, because we were approaching dementia from this medical perspective and treating them as if they were suffering from disease. And so maybe it came naturally to me to think about people, my elders as just being my elders, people I would love and respect, and recognize that they were becoming more frail than I, that they needed to have my oversight, my respectful care. And so maybe with my background, my undergraduate degree was in English and German. One of the first premises that I applied when I was working with my friends, my neighbors, my clients, was that I learned in language acquisition. And when someone is learning a second language, we know that they make errors, and that we tend to make the same errors depending on what our first language was. A woman named Mina Shaughnessy wrote a book called Errors and Expectations, and one of the premises of language acquisition is that when the human brain makes an error, it's logical. It's based on what was learned before. And I applied that to my experience with my clients, my elders who were experiencing dementia. And so my expectation was that if I couldn't make sense out of the behavior, out of what they were doing, if I couldn't understand why they were doing something, I needed to apply a legal premise and assume that I didn't know enough of the facts and step back, look at the bigger picture, assume that what they're doing is logical and that I just needed to know more. And so that became my application of the experiential model. So now let's take a look at what this means. One of the great truths of life is that the way we define a problem determines the solutions available. And so if we apply a model, a medically based model to dementia, we receive, or we must deal with, a certain set of problems. And if we apply an experiential model, that changes. It changes which problems we must solve. So looking at these two models, let's look first at the biomedical model. Now, a biomedical model is the one used for research, for disease. The goal is to identify the necessary treatment or a cure. And so what happens, you know, you think about, let's think about this in terms of someone who's experienced, who has been diagnosed with cancer. When that person begins to deal with that cancer, they want to go to the doctors and specialists, and they want the doctors and specialists to be very focused on this cancer. We want the doctors to do a number of tests and perform tests until they know exactly what type of cancer this is. We want to know exactly where it is, how far it's spread in the body. We want to know how far along it is. And once we've ascertained everything we can about this ill health or abnormality, then we can then decide and make educated decisions about what type of treatment to pursue. And so this is what we do when we apply a biomedical model. Our goal is to change the person from ill health, from abnormal, back to normal. We want to bring them back to health. And we can use drugs or surgery. We might be able to use radiation or chemo or surgery to remove a tumor. This is a very, very effective and appropriate way to respond to disease and to perform research in a lab, isolation, and the identification of treatment, application of cure. So then what happens when we apply that, as we have been doing, to dementia? What happens is we look at the person and we want to identify the ways that dementia is changing them. And so our focus is on the dementia, not on the person. And what we see, rather than a tumor growing or a broken bone that needs to be mended, what we see is a change in their behaviors. And so with our model, we must then assume that behaviors are symptoms. And then once we've identified these behaviors, we need to label them so we can recognize them. And that's where we get the terms dementia-related behaviors. And examples of dementia-related behaviors are sundowning, exit-seeking, wandering, restless behaviors, combative behaviors. All of these are terms that we use to identify the symptoms of dementia. Well, now these are symptoms, and so now it's important to normalize them or to stop these behaviors, because these are not the way the person previously behaved. And so we turn to what we have in a biomedical model. We have surgery or we have drugs. And what we do with dementia is we prescribe mood-altering drugs or psychotropic drugs so that we can normalize or prevent these behaviors that are the symptoms of dementia. What we can do then also is isolate the person. We provide, basically it's incarceration here in the United States. People are checked in or sent to a memory care unit. The doors are locked. They are not able to get out. And then we use these psychotropic drugs to alter their behaviors. In other countries where it's just not possible for the general population to afford to simply send people away when they begin to exhibit these behaviors associated with dementia, families simply lock the person away and do their best to keep the person from causing trouble in the community. But when we do this, what we are assuming is that our model, our biomedical model, and our pursuit or our belief that treatment is necessary, we're assuming that's possible. And yet it's not. When we give somebody a psychotropic drug, or when we put them behind locked doors so they can't run away, what we're doing is making it impossible for them to express themselves. We're not taking away the emotion that caused the behavior in the first place. We've simply taken away the person's ability to express themselves. So our model is broken. Let's look at, if we were instead to look at the opposite of treatment, if we make our goal care, to support the quality of life the person is experiencing, to support the person's dignity, rather than change them. Knowing that we cannot change them, we can apply a model that allows us to provide care. And so now let's look at the experiential care model. When we think about a person as in need of care, because we recognize that they cannot be cured, they cannot be given a treatment that will take away what it is they're experiencing, then we turn our focus away from what's wrong with the person and begin looking at the person's experience. We look at what the person can do. We identify what the person cannot any longer do. And we start to think about their emotional needs. This is the opposite of a biomedical or treatment model. This is where we expect or we accept that the person is in a state of changing cognitive and emotional needs that we cannot alter. And instead, we expect to alter or we change the environment to accommodate the person. So now let's apply this experiential model to dementia. And our goal then is quality of life. We want life and experience to be as good as possible for this person, for our elder. We want their behaviors. We understand that their behaviors are expressions of their emotional needs, and we grant that respect. We plan and we alter the environment as their abilities change. We won't know at what speed or at what degree those abilities will change, but we expect to alter the environment to keep them safe and to meet their needs as time goes on. The beautiful thing about this is that this model, the experiential model or the care model, is what we've been doing for centuries. We as people have always used this approach when we raise children. It's not new to us. And so thinking about this model, the experiential model, it is appropriate. It does make sense if we cannot cure the person, if we do not have a treatment for them. But it is the only sensible way to proceed when the person is experiencing changing skills. Children are gaining skills. Children are becoming more cognitively able. Their emotional development is maturing. Our elders, on the other hand, are at the other end of life, at the other end of the bell curve that is life, childhood, adulthood, elderhood. And our elders are losing skills, and they're losing abilities, and their emotions are not maturing, their emotions are mature. So this is when the experiential model is very appropriate, and it brings tremendous benefits because we don't need to become medical experts in order to be kind to an elder who is experiencing dementia. In the process of learning more about dementia from the perspective of how it changes our experience, of how it changes our cognitive skills, we increase our understanding of the person's emotional needs. And this increases our empathy. And as empathy is increased, incidence of abuse and neglect is decreased. And when we are learning more about and spending more time with this person at home, we can put off expensive care elsewhere, but we can also put off the emotional distress that not understanding what's happening and not understanding how to provide care causes both parties, both the family who are looking after the individual and the individual themselves. It is a wonderful thing to be able to say, my children are gaining, they are growing, they are learning, they are gaining skills. And also to be able to say, my grandmother, my grandfather, my spouse, my loved one is losing skills because they are experiencing this condition that so often accompanies the natural aging process. This then, once we begin to understand that our loved one is just losing specific skills, then we as families can work together. But then we as families in a community can also help other people in the community come to understand dementia and what happens when we experience dementia. In the United States, we have a movement towards developing dementia-friendly communities, and it's beginning to be more and more visible here, but we are a long ways from seeing that in effect. But the best way to do it is simply to have a family or caregivers who are out in the community with their clients who are experiencing dementia, and in their day-to-day interactions with businesses and business people and restaurants and cafes and neighbors. They demonstrate this is how we support somebody when they're experiencing dementia. And that was what I was able to do there in Moscow, Idaho. So now let's look at the Dawn method, and we'll apply and we'll see how the experiential model fits with dementia, the way that I began doing it. And I want to say that, you know, everything that I teach and everything included in the Dawn method comes from me working with somebody and failing, doing something that did not help, that did not work, that caused them pain, and not understanding until I'd done it and tried and found a way to preserve the person's dignity and autonomy and sense of self, and yet still keep them safe and improve their quality of life. So all of this that I'm explaining today comes from my work with people. So let's think now, how is it then that dementia affects functioning? So we'll go back and look at these skills that we lose to dementia. There are changes to our attention skills. Ian McGilchrist, the British 3-time Oxford Fellow in neurology, psychology, and philosophy, who now lives on the Isle of Skye, he tells us that there are 5 different types of attention skills. And in my work with my clients, I saw them losing 3 types. I saw them becoming unable to direct their attention, redirect their attention, and choose to maintain their attention. Now, if I'm losing attention skills, if it's becoming harder for me to maintain my attention, and I'm also losing language skills, because when we begin to lose the executive functions and this rational thinking that goes when we're experiencing dementia, we also lose the ability to facts and vocabulary, that's factual learning, but we lose even the language of our childhood. We lose even the spoken language that we first learned. But if I'm losing attention skills and language skills, that will affect every interaction I have, whether it's as simple as attempting to purchase apples down at the corner grocers, or whether it's as complex as trying to discuss a problem with a child with my spouse. Every interaction, every relationship is affected when we begin to lose attention skills and language skills. That's pretty profound loss. But we also lose rational thinking skills. And if you're talking with a neurologist, generally you will hear we are given the term executive functions. And this involves the ability to manipulate or grapple with language, to compare factual information, to analyze information, to prioritize the importance of one thing over another. And when we lose these skills, we lose the ability to exercise good judgment, and our ability to perceive risk is limited. And so people begin to make terrible decisions in their daily lives, in their ability to care for themselves and do what they need to do to keep themselves safe, or keep the grandchild they're babysitting, looking after, safe. They begin to make bad decisions. They put themselves at risk. If they're also losing attention skills along with these executive functions, that means they can't even complete the simplest of tasks. Even boiling a pot of water becomes impossible eventually with these losses. Once again, that is a very profound loss. This puts a person This makes a person unable to live alone before much time passes. But that's not all that happens when someone begins to experience dementia. They also lose not just their memory, but their memory skills. And when we lose the skill of recalling or retrieving information from our memory banks, then we become unable to use information from the past or knowledge of the past to shape and give us a clear perception of what's happening in the present. That means that we become less and less able to perceive reality. These three losses profoundly affect our ability to live life. This is pretty huge. But before I had spent very many months there in Moscow, and for 5 years, I think I spent more of my time with people who were experiencing dementia than with people who were not. I learned this truth first, that although dementia takes away many skills, it does not take away all our skills. We do not lose our minds. We do not lose our intelligence. We do not lose our humanity. We lose some very specific skills, not all of them. And that's a really important thing to understand if you love somebody who's experiencing dementia, or if you want to work with people who are experiencing dementia. Now, this is what I call the living with dementia chart. It's a metaphor. It's a picture, a shorthand, to give us an easy glimpse of what to expect when a loved one is living with dementia. If we do, everything on the left is lost, everything on the right is retained. But these are profound differences. We as human beings have two complete sets of thinking skills. Good people to turn to for that would be Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, or Daniel Kahneman wrote the book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. In those books, Einstein's work, ancient Greek philosophers, we know that we have these very different thinking processes. Rational thinking skills are lost to dementia, but our intuitive skills are not. We keep those. And these intuitive thinking skills are our primary, our basic, our most essential thinking skills. Intuitive thinking skills are our thinking skills that gather information unfiltered. Our rational thinking skills are the ones that disseminate, separate, sort, and order information. Intuitive thinking skills are inductive, whereas rational thinking skills are deductive. That's a very important thing to understand if we're talking about, when we are talking about dementia and somebody living with dementia. And then think about our psychological selves. Yes, we lose our memory skills. Yes, we lose our knowledge of the past. We lose our ability to reminisce. We lose our ability to feel at home, to know, to recognize that we are surrounded by what is familiar. We lose all that. But we do not lose our experiential self, and the experiential self is the seat of the soul. It is us. It is the part of us that remains 100% experiential, alive, and interactive in the moment. Daniel Kahneman tells us that the logical interpretation of now, of what is now, the present, is about 3 seconds in length. And I know with my clients, I would see them eventually lose all their memory skills and lose all of their rational thinking skills. And their memory skills allowed them to drift into the past or draw knowledge from the past. And their rational thinking skills allowed them to anticipate the future, to initiate activity, to plan and see that the future was safe. And they would become completely stuck in the present, and they would need reassurance about every 3 seconds. That's our psychological selves. We keep our experiential self. And then thinking about our attention skills. If you have all of your attention skills, you can choose where to put your attention. And that is what we call being mindful. You are in control of your attention skills, and you can develop those skills and have more control about where your attention goes, where it wanders. But if you lose your attention skills, you do not lose the tools of mindlessness. When we're experiencing dementia, we do not lose the ability to complete tasks on autopilot without using rational thinking, without using memory. If we are in our familiar homes, we can use the tools automatic thinking scripts and the tool muscle memory. And those are very helpful tools for helping somebody continue to function at a higher level for longer. So that's what it is. That's what it feels like to be living with dementia. From the perspective of, just a sec, I must have bumped something. There we go. From the perspective of the companions, if somebody's losing rational thinking skills, these three are going to be the most frustrating. People lose the ability to see cause and effect. They lose the ability to see a sequence, even simply 2 steps, like please put on your shoes and socks. That's the sequence of 2. Prioritization goes. Their ability to understand why one thing is more important than another, why they should stop drinking their cup of coffee and begin to get ready to go to a doctor appointment. People lose these, and it's very frustrating if we don't understand that those skills are gone or going. At the same time, we do not lose our ability to receive, and we continue to receive sensory data. This enables us to fully enjoy beauty. And so if we understand that our companion who's experiencing dementia is still receiving all of that sensory data, we can be careful that we bring experiential sensory data to them that is pleasing to them. And we can be careful that we are of how we work with them and whether we are causing discomfort or fear, because we never lose our ability to feel our feelings when we begin to experience dementia. We continue to feel our feelings even if we can't name them or explain why we feel the way we do. The other thing we continue to do, because we've kept our intuitive thinking skills, is we continue to read the emotions on our companions' faces. We see their emotions through their expressions, their intonation, their gestures, their body language. And so if I'm the companion of somebody who's experiencing dementia, it's incredibly important that I understand that they continue to read my emotions. But the problem is, without rational thinking, they can't interpret why I feel the way I do. They just see it. And without memory skills, they can't remember why I might appear to be worried or upset. They just know I'm worried or upset. And these 4 F's of stress, this is your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This is the way human beings respond when they are stressed. And it depends on our personality, it depends on the situation, but we don't lose that when we begin to experience dementia. We continue to have these stress responses. Very important that if you are the companion of somebody who's experiencing dementia and you know they don't have rational thinking skills, they're losing those, we need to understand that their fight or flight responses are still there, fully active. Then thinking about this knowledge of the past, we lose our ability to drift into the past, but we are fully able to enjoy the present, and we are fully experiential of whatever occurs to us. Attention skills, mindfulness, and mindlessness, we've talked about that. So this is truth number 1, that dementia takes away some of our skills. But dementia does not take away all of our skills, and it is not random. There is order. And when there's order, we can anticipate and we can work with it. And we can recognize the strengths and we can support those strengths and then take care of what the person cannot do. The second truth I learned when I spent time, all of my time with people who were experiencing dementia, was that When we lose cognitive skills, when we find ourselves unable to do something we've been doing our whole lives, when we find that we cannot recall what was said a moment ago or what happened a minute ago, we react with emotional distress. In the world of dementia, in the experience of dementia, it is the emotion that is the problem. It is not the behavior. We can numb or we can prevent a person from expressing the behaviors, but the emotions are still there and still causing problems. And the other thing we need to think about is whether or not the person is able to comprehend that they're losing these skills. If I'm unable to comprehend that I'm losing skills, then it will seem to me that everybody around me is trying to trick me and accuse me of forgetting things or losing things when really they're stealing from me. On the other hand, if I'm fully aware that I'm losing my skills to dementia, I won't be reacting with anger and frustration and paranoia. I will be reacting with fear. My fight or flight response will be flight. I will be terrified, and rightfully so, because I will understand what is going to happen to my family as a result of the dementia that I am beginning to experience. And so these emotional needs of dementia, to my mind, and I know I differ from all the other people, all the other methods of dementia care, but to me, what I saw in my clients was a primary, that their very sense of self and security was most greatly at risk, put at risk, and attacked by dementia. And so these emotional needs, I created the flower as a metaphor for the emotional needs of dementia. And in the very center are three tools or three emotional needs. People who are experiencing dementia, they need to have mood management. They need help from their companions to help them feel positive moods. But because they're losing those memory skills, they are going to be living forevermore in confusion. And their confusion will be increasing from day to day, from year to year. And they will never be able to escape it. And so they will have to relearn how to live in confusion and feel safe in confusion. Most of our lives, we have spent learning that it is not safe to not know what's going on around us. And then security and care. We spend our lives becoming more capable and learning how to do everything and how to take care of ourselves and others. But when dementia comes into the picture, we lose the ability to take care of even ourselves. And so we have to be taught and relearn that we can still be safe, even though we can't take care of even the simplest tasks for ourselves. The outside of the dawn flower is four petals of well-being. And you can't teach somebody well-being. You can teach somebody security. And we learn our entire lives. We are constantly learning whether we're safe with a person or unsafe, whether we are safe in a situation or unsafe. And we do that through experience, through experiential learning. And that is something we retain with our intuitive thinking skills. But these outer petals, the outer four, well-being, those four petals represent the well-being tools of the Dawn method. And these 7 emotional needs are the 7 tools of the Dawn method. But these outer four, the petals, we can't teach somebody to feel successful in conversation. We can't teach somebody to feel that they are in control of themselves and making decisions about their own bodies and their near environment. We can't teach somebody that they are of value. We can only bring moments of beauty, and we can recognize that emotional need and do something or say something that brings a sense of well-being, of happiness to them in the moment. So those are the 7 tools of the Dawn method that I'm going to introduce in a moment. But here is the same information. And between these 2 slides, what I've done is in the first slide, I have arranged the information. I've communicated to you the Dawn tools for your intuitive thinking skills. That's how you are assessing and making sense out of this slide. The second slide gives you exactly the same information, but this time I have organized it so that you can assess it and access it with your rational thinking skills. You see, we have two sets and they're very different, and they enable us to do very different things. So I think I still have about 10 minutes, and because we started a little bit late. And so what I would like to do is just briefly introduce the 7 tools of the Dawn method. And we'll start by looking at Dawn's security needs. We begin in the middle with mood management. Now, mood management, because our loved ones who are experiencing dementia are losing their memory skills and they're losing their rational thinking skills, they are losing the ability to manage their own moods. And in all the relationships of your life, you have never before been able to manage another person's mood. And if somebody else says that you are the fault, they feel the way, you are the reason they end at fault for the way they feel, it's not true. But when somebody has lost their memory skills and their rational thinking skills, we do manage their moods. And so I teach that it's really important that we understand that this is happening. A person who doesn't have memory skills or rational thinking skills, who sees the expression on my face, cannot analyze for themselves why I might look upset or might be frowning. And they cannot recall what happened yesterday or last week that caused me to be concerned and worried and frowning for the last few days. All they can do is look at the frown on my face and say, oh my goodness, and this will depend on their personality and their previous life experiences and our relationship. Oh my goodness, Judy's mad at me. I must have done something bad. And so they may begin to feel guilty. Or they might look at me and say, what's she so upset about? I didn't do anything wrong. And then they're going to be frustrated and angry with me. They might be looking at me and see that frown and think, oh no, I did something wrong, and now I will be afraid. This is what happens when people don't have memory skills and rational thinking skills. We affect their moods. And so it becomes incredibly important that we know this, that we understand they're using their intuitive thinking skills to read our body language, intonation, and facial expressions. And so we must manage our own moods if we spend time with somebody who's experiencing dementia. We need to manage theirs. And so we can use we use our own memory and our own rational thinking skills to plan ways to bring beautiful sensory stimuli into their presence. We plan to have, we think of ways we can distract them from any general sense of unease that is a result of being confused and not understanding what's going on around us. And we must consider and think about how a person who's losing those very skills is not able to properly interpret what's happening in the present. And so rather than correcting them and telling them that they are wrong about what they think is going on, and trying to, to correct somebody is to put a barrier, to put a stop in front of them. And so rather than doing that, which then just becomes confrontational, rather than doing that, we understand that we need to lead rather than stop. And we can bring more positive sensory stimuli and give them information that makes them feel better about the present. So there are very specific techniques and ways that we can manage our own moods so that we don't negatively impact the mood of the person who's experiencing dementia, and that we can manage their moods and create more positive moods. That is this tool number 1. I teach it first because, and it is the first tool because managing mood is something we must do at all times when one of us is experiencing dementia. Tool number 2, security and confusion, because someone who's experiencing dementia is losing the ability to retain knowledge. All of us at any moment can just draw information from our minds as we wish. We all know how we ended up here today. We all know what we did this morning. We all know how we got to where we are currently sitting. We all have a vast array of knowledge that shapes our every moment and our perception of what's going on in the moment. And we're used to being able to access that information as we need to. Our brains do it instantaneously. But when somebody has lost the ability to access knowledge of the past, they will be ever more confused. And that is scary, and it is uncomfortable, because our brains are like our stomachs. If your stomach is empty, it will tell you, and it will continue to tell you until you give it food, give it what it needs. And our brains are the same way. I always cringe when I hear that people who are experiencing dementia should be given a low stimuli environment. To me, that is torture. We need to have positive, pleasant, so sensory stimuli, that is beautiful to us and it's ever so personal. But we need to be able to fill our brains and give our brains information to work on. We need sensory stimuli to rest, to not be restless, to not be exit seeking, to sleep at night. But we also just need to know what's going on. And so the first premise I teach here with tool number 2 is that if somebody is asking you for information, give it to them every time they ask. And eventually somebody who finds that every time they ask, they are given the information they need, and they're not made to feel embarrassed or guilty, and they can't see that is causing me to be very frustrated or irritated with them. Pretty soon, my clients, I always know my client has learned security and confusion when they say, we'll be driving someplace and my client will say, so Judy, where are we going? Where are we going? And I'll say, oh, I thought we'd go for a drive. It's such a pretty day. And then she says, oh, okay, that sounds great. And then about 3 seconds later, she'll say, Judy, where are we going? What are we doing? And I'll say, oh, I thought we'd go for a drive. The hills are so pretty. And every time, pretty soon, I know my client has learned security and confusion when she'll say, Judy, where are we going? Oh, that's okay. I know you know. That's somebody who's learned it's okay to be confused because she's safe with me, because I know. And so this is security and confusion, the need for information. Sometimes, though, when you've addressed the brain's need for information, and if the person keeps on asking questions, you must realize that sometimes we need information, but sometimes we just need reassurance. And so there are techniques and ways to make sure that the person gets the information they need, but also we can listen for the feelings, the feeling driving the question, the feeling behind the question. And when you give a varied answer, and you'll eventually hit on what it is that they needed to know. And that way you can address both their need for reassurance and their information. That's when people learn that they are secure. The third tool of security is security and care. Now, for somebody to learn that they are safe with me caring for them, they must learn 3 things. They must learn that I will not test their memory, that they are safe regarding the interchange of information between us. They can ask questions, but I will not put them on the spot. They must also have learned that when we are getting things done, whatever it is, whether it's getting up in the morning, getting dressed, going to the grocery store, changing a baby, whatever it is, when we are doing a task, we do it together. We do it as teammates. I'm not the instructor. I don't treat them as if I know best and they know nothing or they are crazy. They must come to learn from me, my behavior, that I will always be respectful and that it's okay to get things done, to succeed, to fail, to have to do a task over again, to do it more than once. And then third, they must learn, they must find that whenever they're with me, no matter what they communicate as their belief of what's gone in the past, as their belief of what's going on in the present, that I will not correct them or try to make them believe something different by stopping them with a correction, that I will support that and work with it. So this is how you teach a person who's losing very profoundly important cognitive skills that they can still be safe. And then the well-being needs, these outer four petals, this they cannot learn. This is just your opportunity to bring beauty into the life of someone who cannot do it for themselves. And if we don't do it for them, there is no way for them to enjoy this happiness and fulfillment, this sense of well-being. I'm going to go through these a little quicker for us so we don't go over and go into question time. But it is important, we human beings, and it does not matter whether we are experiencing dementia or not, we need to feel that we are successful in interacting with others. We are social creatures, and we do need to be able to carry on conversations and take part in conversations, have something to offer. And so we, as the companions of people who are experiencing memory loss, people who are becoming unable to retain all of that bank and huge amount of past knowledge that all of us have, we have to reorganize the way and change the rules of conversation so that we take care of that for them. And we do it in one way with people who know them. We do it in another way in the community when we're dealing with others who are strangers. And then it's really important to know and consider that when somebody's losing attention skills, every time the scene is changed, every time you go from one room to another, it's a new activity. And so we have to think about how human beings interpret activities or events, and the importance of how an activity or event ends and how important that is. And once again, here with social success, I talk about the importance of tailoring sensory and social stimulation to meet this person's own personal needs and personality. But very critical to our sense of well-being as human beings is to feel that we are in control of our bodies, in control of ourselves, our immediate, our clothing, our immediate presence, our environment. We need to be able to make decisions, and human dignity is precisely a part of decision making. It's the flip side of the coin of choice. Without choice, we are without dignity. There's no way to lose the ability to exercise autonomy and retain our dignity. And so it's very important that we understand how we can help somebody who's losing rational thinking skills, losing the ability to perceive risk and make good judgments. How do we help that person make good decisions? How do we help that person feel that they are in control of their bodies and themselves? And so there's very specific techniques. And here, when we're talking about helping somebody make good decisions when they're not truly equipped, we have to think about the concepts of the difference between manipulating another person or motivating another person. If you have children in your life, or if you have someone who's experiencing dementia in your life, you cannot avoid thinking about the difference between those two principles. And so here the techniques are arranged by order of least invasive to most invasive. And I know I'm the only person who talks about the incredibly powerful catchphrase and how useful that is when you're working with somebody who's lost or is losing rational thinking skills and vocabulary. Because if you take a fact, which is a single word, and you turn it into a phrase, you've taken something from the realm of rational thinking and moved it into the realm of intuitive thinking. And when you do that, you enable them to retain the information, use the information. You enable them to accept something they must accept, or accept a loss they grow to live with. And so this developing a sense of control for the individual is so critically important for our well-being. But no less important is this sense of value. We as human beings, if we do not feel that we have something to offer in our relationships, if we do not feel that we can forgive, that we can give, or that we can, that we have value, that people, those in our life value us, then we cannot have a sense of value ourselves. And so this is where I'm teaching the balancing of safety and the person, because it would be lovely to wrap them in cotton wool and keep them perfectly safe forever. But if you do that, you completely ignore their personhood, their dignity, their autonomy. And so we have to grapple with this balancing act at all times. Then the seventh, the last tool of the Dawn method is is a little different. And here it's to have a sense of a secure future, to help your loved one or your client get away from this feeling of impending doom. In English, we don't really have good ways to describe it, but there's this sense of general unease that it took me several years to figure out how I could address it, how I could save my clients from this just feeling that something awful was going to occur before long. And it came from when I came to understand our security symbols. And security symbols, again, this is something that we as human beings, we all have security symbols, and they are the result of the events of our early childhood. And we all have them, and they may appear to be illogical to other people, but if they understood what we had experienced as children, they would understand why something is our security symbol. And so it's really important to identify that for somebody who's experiencing dementia. That does not go away. It can become a caricature of what it once was, and it can develop into these behaviors that are cyclical and unavoidable and very damaging, and prevent quality of life and enjoyment. I also teach at this point that when somebody is losing their memory skills, it is critically important that we, as their companions, begin to use our memory skills on their behalf. And so often I hear that, you know, someone will say, I lost my mother to dementia. She hasn't died, but I have lost her. I have lost my husband to dementia. He doesn't know who I am anymore. And that is such an unnecessary loss and such an unnecessary grief, because we still have our memory skills. And what I do when I have a client, when the person gets to the point where they no longer know, they no longer recognize people, they no longer know people's names, they can no longer recall what the relationship is between them and this person. That's when I will just sit down with the person and I become the memory keeper. And it is my job then. And I tell them who they are and who I am and what our relationship is. Mary, hi, I'm Judy. You know who I am? I'm your dear friend, Judy. You and me, we really love each other. We have spent, let me think, 8 years together. And then I start to tell her her favorite memories. And I will have spent all of my time as she repeated her favorite stories over and over again. I will have memorized her stories in her phrases, using her words. And now I'm her memory keeper. Now I tell her her favorite stories and her memories. And what I do for my clients is I tell them who they are, who they love, who loves them. And I tell them the good things they've done in life so that they know, so that they can rest knowing that they have lived a good life. This is critical for our sense of well-being. And I think it is the greatest kindness for somebody who has lost the ability to recall for themselves who loves them, who they love, and the good things they've done in their lives. This is what I've just been explaining. This is what it looks like if you begin working with dementia from an experiential model. Families become more aware of their loved ones' needs. And when that happens, when we come to understand the other person's emotional needs, that's the only way we can combat neglect and abuse. It comes from understanding each other's emotions. And when we learn to recognize these skills that are kept and the skills that are lost in dementia, that is when we can begin lowering the cost, the emotional cost, the distress and the conflict that normally accompanies dementia when somebody in the family begins to experience it. And when families begin to understand their loved one's emotional needs in dementia and then a loved one's skills kept and lost in dementia, then they can communicate that to other families and to the community and to the businesses in the community. And when that happens, then we can decrease stigma and we can decrease expense. It comes from this understanding. It can only come from using a model that works. And so that's what has kept me working with the Dawn method for 11 years now, I guess. I never did get to go back and practice law. I'm still an attorney in Idaho, and I certainly keep up on it. But all of my time, my heart is in helping spread the word that there is a way to understand dementia and that it comes from using an experiential model. So I'll turn it back over to you, Professor Emanuela.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. I would be listening to you for more time. Okay.
Yes. Should I stop sharing my screen? Would that help?
Well, that's okay. No problem. You can keep it if you want.
A gente pode abrir para perguntas. Alguém quer fazer algum comentário? Eu fiz anotações aqui de pontos que eu acho super importante conversar com a Judy, mas eu acho que é importante vocês se colocarem também, quem está aí nos acompanhando, nos assistindo. Ok, eu vou a minha pergunta e vou compartilhar com vocês a minha pergunta em português e depois o Danilo ele transmite a questão para a Judy. Eu queria primeiro, fiquei muito feliz quando encontrei a Judy, né, nas suas publicações, encontrei os seus livros, porque vem muito de encontro ao que eu faço, ao que eu acredito que a gente tem que avançar. E me fica a questão, assim, interessante o quanto a sua proposta, o seu método vem da sua prática, da sua experiência de vida, né, da sua história de vida, mas que a gente tem poucos profissionais da área da saúde falando a respeito disso, né? Falando da importância de minimizar o estigma, o quanto a gente precisa falar a respeito da dignidade da pessoa com demência, dos seus direitos. Então, eu encontrei no seu material, encontrei aí na sua prática algo que me enche de prazer e que complementa a minha prática, mas eu acho que a gente precisa falar mais disso, né? Um comentário.
Well, Judy, Professor Emanuela, thanks you for participating and for sharing this presentation with us. She was telling everyone how she came across your work and your books and how she read them and understood your work. And she thinks it's extremely interesting how you came onto this field, to this area from a different area by experience. And then this is something we also have here in Brazil, in our culture, which is medical staff and medical professionals are always focusing on the disease, the problem, treating, trying to bring back to normality, and that it's very important for us to talk about this with the professionals, with caregivers, so that we can understand that there's a different way to deal with the situation and develop and improve quality of life and relationship in the community, not only for the person suffering from dementia, but also for those who suffer through the person suffering from dementia. We had some comments here, some people thanking you for your presentation. It was very inspirational. That's something that Bruno Passos de Carvalho said. So many good comments, and I guess we also have some questions.
Great. Okay.
Very good. So, Professor Emanuela, você quer ler as perguntas e eu traduzo?
Ok. A minha parceira de trabalho, parceira de Unifesp, a Márcia, ela pergunta se você tem experiência de aplicação com esse modelo em larga escala, em um grande número de pessoas.
Right, so the question is about your method, the Dawn method, being applied in large scale, if you have experience with that.
You know, I think probably, right now I'm talking with the University of Nevada about doing a study, and they've asked me to start kind of tabulating. I would imagine we're looking at probably 500 families across the United States that have been, not counting the books. The books, I should have counted it up, but the books were, my first book was a top-selling book in the United States for a couple of years. So I know that reached many people. It also sells in Italy, Germany, Britain, Japan, South Korea. I've had requests for translation into Korean and India. And I was working with India. There was a agency there working with 40,000 families, and we were trying to translate my work into Hindi. Then the COVID struck. So families I've taught, we're looking at probably 200-300 in North America and England. Families I've consulted with, probably that'd be like another couple hundred, 300, 400. It's hard, it's hard to say. I haven't really kept track so much as just tried to share. So I've never had a family tell me it didn't work. And the comments on the books, I don't think I've ever had anybody comment on a book and say, this does not work. So
I see, but then training sessions and the work that you have been doing have been more focused on families and smaller scale rather than large scale yet.
Yeah. Yes, because in the United States, the corporations use the traditional approach to dementia, which is biomedical. And they are completely set up. All of the care facilities are set up in that manner. And so to hear me suggesting there are ways that people could stay at home longer, they are not welcoming the Dawn method. It's
for sure, David and Goliath.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I see. Well, we have another question here from Jorge Luis. He's saying, good morning, Professor Judy. Do you think that the stigma of dementia could be diminished through early education of children?
Yes. Yeah, because children are natural, intuitive thinkers. And I've seen it. One family I was teaching, I think there were 8 members of the family, and the youngest was a little girl of 6. And she was listening in, but then when I was interacting with the family and the grandmother, she was just a natural. She was intuitively knowing what I was teaching. In another family, it was the grandchildren were 8 and 11, and the 8-year-old took notes, the 11-year-old took notes, and the mother reported that the children really were very talkative about it over dinner, how what I was suggesting was working with grandmother. So definitely. Oh, and I think the best thing to do would be to have preschool programs and adult daycare programs for people who are experiencing dementia and working with the two populations together. Not done in the United States, but they're beginning to do it in Britain.
Very well. I remember an example you gave us in a previous meeting when we talked about the police officer who arrested an elderly woman who had dementia. I believe that if he had had more contact with that kind of program as a child, teenager, maybe his behavior could have been different.
Yes, definitely. A big problem in the United States is that since the 1960s, with the introduction of Social Security payments, which is a sizable payment to the elderly, that 3 generations of Americans have grown up with no elders. And so young people, simply do not understand what it means to be elderly. And when you watch the footage, those video cams of that police officer taking down that woman and breaking her, he broke the humerus, dislocated her shoulder, and broke both her wrists. It was as if he was interacting or playing a video game, and he was completely unaware that somebody could be more frail than him. So lack of socialization of young people with older people is a tremendous problem. And especially in this culture, I think we've lost knowledge that life has 3 stages, that we begin as children, that we become adults and become capable and spend our time working and doing, but that then we go into a 3rd stage, which is elderhood, when we need to be, again, looked after, but that we have much wisdom and it's a time for us to just be and share. So modern society doesn't really support the role of an elder.
That's really,
and we lose empathy.
It's interesting and complicated because at the same time we are technically going through life preparing for our old age, right? And
yes,
yet,
yeah.
Well, we have another question, this one from Marcia Novelli. She says, thank you. What are your main difficulties with the families to move into the concept of the Dawn method? Because the stigma exists, and in your work, we change the mindset in relation to dementia, right? So what would be the main difficulties for families to accept?
The greatest difficulty for me, definitely, is visibility, is getting the word out. Because once a family hears about me, even when I teach them the first class, they're just overjoyed. And one of my partner agencies, Jill, she says, when I get to tell a family about the Dawn method, it's like I'm giving them a breath of fresh air or a drink of water in a desert. I can't remember exactly how she said that, but it is like that. People are just overwhelmed with gratitude. But like I'm not wealthy, and so
they're probably relieved.
Yeah, they're very relieved, because all of a sudden, even the very first principles, it helps. It starts to help and works, and so, but it's not, I don't have the money to lobby Congress and get recognized for Medicare, Medicaid repayment for families. I've any of these huge national programs are far beyond my reach. But if a corporation took over, I'm sure they'd monetize it, and then we'd lose. Because what I'm really talking about is how to better understand our own human cognitive abilities so that we are kinder to each other, as specifically applying it to dementia. But
very nice. Empathy, yeah.
Empathy.
Okay, this one comes from Judy Robe. She says, well done, Judy.
Hey, Judy.
One question. Since the beginning of the pandemic, have you had to change anything in the Dawn method to adapt?
With the beginning of the pandemic here, more people stayed home from work. I think we've seen an absolute crisis of isolation for all the elders who are in care facilities, because the care facilities just locked the doors to the families and visitors, and due to risk. And so we were overwhelmed. The Dawn method, my helpers and I, we were just completely overwhelmed with requests from families who now had brought their senior home, or had decided not to put a person into a care facility due to the draconian isolation. And so it's more that we've just been running to keep up with demand, I think. Not that we had to change anything. We haven't had time.
I see, very well. I have one question that I would like to ask. When you say security and confusion, is it trust? Because I understood from the book that the sooner you start with the person, with your method, the better. Yeah. So is there an ideal moment for you to appear into the person's life, or just the sooner the better? And I noticed that in the book you are always introduced as someone or a friend, but not as someone who is there to provide care or to take care of them. So when is the best moment, and how? And when that's not possible, when it's way advanced, the person is already in an advanced state, how do you normally do it?
Well, so the sooner the better is true, because the longer I live with dementia and my companions live with me, as I go further into my dementia, the more problems and discord and pain and bad habits get built into those caregiving relationships. And so, the principle of institutionalization, somebody who is institutionalized due to, say, a mental illness, or here in the US, the juvenile detention facilities, people develop these behaviors we call institutionalized behaviors. It's reactions to prolonged discord in relationships. But for a family that's looking after a loved one who's experiencing dementia, the longer there's discord or conflict, misunderstanding in that changing relationship, the more ingrained these reactions and emotions and behaviors become. So that's why it's always better to start as soon as possible. So, and as a side note, I believe there is also, just like children, there's in the Montessori method for children, there's a learning moment. In a child's cognitive development, there are these points where the child is most open to learn principle or a certain type of knowledge. The same, I think, is true as we're experiencing dementia and losing skills, and that people can get to a point where they have learned that they are not safe, that they cannot be safe, that they will never be safe, and then we can't change that. All of that being said, because I feel there's about 3 topics raised in the one question, but now coming back to when we begin to introduce somebody, let's say there is a family who does want help. They know that grandma or mom or dad or grandpa is experiencing mild cognitive impairment, and memory loss or rational thinking skill losses are becoming apparent. Well, then it depends whether the person is aware of their skills loss, of the changes they're experiencing, or whether they're completely unaware. They have complete anosognosia and they cannot comprehend because the dementia has already affected that part of the brain that allows self-knowledge. Or whether they're aware of memory loss, but they cannot comprehend that they're experiencing rational thinking loss and putting themselves at risk. It depends where they fall, and that's actually the first thing I ascertain in a person when I'm asked to create a care plan, is where do they fall in the scale of anosognosia. And then if they are fully aware that they're losing skills, still they want to preserve as much dignity as possible. And so when we introduce somebody into their life, that person, it's like, yeah, I am a caregiver and I work for Judy's company, Palouse Dementia Care. And yes, your children want us in your life and they want us to help you. But our goal with them then is allow us to be present, to take you on errands, to do things, because we can tell your kids you're doing okay. And so we then become partners in helping that person maintain as much independence and autonomy and dignity as possible. Do that because they know they're losing skills. But just because they're losing skills does not mean that they want to give up all control of life and privacy in their own homes. But then those who are unable to perceive, to comprehend, because the anosognosia has already taken away their self-knowledge, those people then will not accept care. They think that their children are interfering, that people are out to steal from them, that people are out to find out what's going on in the house so they can be thrown into a care facility. So that person, we need to introduce a friend, somebody who just happened to be in the neighborhood, somebody who likes walking dogs, somebody who, like my most difficult ever client was a man who had complete anosognosia. He believed that he was about 45 years old and that he was smarter than everybody. And he was brilliant. He was a scientist and he was a CEO of his own company that had gone international. And he was smarter than most people, but then he developed dementia. And his kids had come and wanted him to have help. He refused it. He locked the doors. He wouldn't let anybody in. A neighbor would leave groceries on the back porch. And when they contacted me and they said, we don't know how you can do it. We don't know if you can do it, but if you would please try. And so what I would do is just show up on this man's front doorstep every morning at about 11:45 noon, 11:30, 12, because we knew he woke up at about 10 or 11 in the morning. And I would just knock on the door, ring the bell, and this went on for about 2 weeks. He would come to the door and yell at me, tell me to get off his property, leave him alone, stop trespassing. Who did I think I was? And he would be really, really rude and call me names. And I'd say, oh, I'm sorry. I was just in the neighborhood and I was just passing by. I'm on my way to lunch. And I thought maybe you'd like to go out for lunch and join me. And after about 2 weeks, he said yes, because we knew he was hungry. And so then I was able to invite him out for lunch, but boy, nobody could go in that house. He was ever so, very, very careful of his privacy because he felt like his kids were out to get him. It took us quite some time, months. And soon I would take him for lunch and we'd have a caregiver sneak in the back door and just sanitize the surfaces and clean the toilets and, put some clean socks and underwears in his drawer, put food in the fridge. And he, of course, couldn't perceive that there were any changes. And gradually, and one day, I asked him if my friend Sarah, if he would agree to let her clean, because she needed to earn money to go back to college. Well, he agreed with that, and so we presented care for him in a manner that allowed him to be the person who was doing something good for that person. So it was Sarah who had a need, not him. And so this is what I mean when I'm saying, preserve dignity and help the person make good decisions, rather than overpower them and lock them up and start drugging them so that they don't react or express their emotions and their outrage and their misunderstanding in their behaviors.
Perfect.
That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
That was a very good one.
We have more questions, but I think our time is come to the end. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can send to you the other questions.
Okay.
By email. Okay.
Great idea.
And
yes.
Now I am amazed in this moment. I need to thank you for your time, your attention. Thank you a lot for these discussions. And I think, or I hope that our discussion can be a seed for each one of us. Okay?
Yes, I sure hope so too. I'm more than happy to answer questions via email too. But thank you so much, Professor Emanuela, because what a wonderful opportunity is. I'm always so glad to share this knowledge that I learned from spending time with my elders there in Moscow.
I will talk about more and more about DAO methods here, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.